Redditors who clean up crime scenes, what's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed?
I've got a ton. I used to do CSI work and was an autopsy tech, so I would both go to the scene, investigate, bring the body back to the morgue, and help with the autopsy. Anyways, this person murdered their spouse, and stuffed the body into a fridge, and buried it in the woods. When you have a body exposed to the elements, you have normal decomposition to look forward to, such as insects, floating, gases, skin coming off, bones showing, etc. Once you've seen a few, then you know that this kind of decomp state of body is normal and you know what to expect. There are varying levels of stuff you deal with, but it's all within an expected spectrum of the job. Hope that makes sense. However, in this case, this person was sealed ink, so you didn't have any of that. They were essentially stewing in there for almost a year. Might have been longer. I don't remember the exact time. I wasn't there on scene when they found the person, only in the morgue, to help with the autopsy. So I prep the room. Doctor comes in, and I pull out the body from the fridge and wheel them into where we do the actual autopsy. Open the bag, and oh my god, the smell. I'll never, ever forget the smell. I've dealt with bodies in various stages of death and decomposition, but holy shit, this was on 10 other levels. Now the morgue has HVAC, air filters, fresheners, and all that, but they weren't effective at all for the smell. It was so bad I gagged, which I've never done before, and almost threw up in my mask. The doctor was struggling too. The doc double-backed and almost looked like they were gonna faint. It was the purest, worst, most concentrated, extremely pungent ammonia smell you could think of. I had never smelled anything like that in my career at that point. If wine ages well and is better with time, this ammonia smell did the exact opposite. And it was somewhere worse than anything you can think of. The smell stuck to us too, on our skin, for about a week no matter how hard I scrubbed. I can still smell it if I think about it. The texture of the body didn't help either. It was so slippery and wet that flecks of the ammonia fluid splashed onto my skin. The long gloves went up to my forearm, not all the way to my scrubs. It was the worst autopsy of my life. It took about 3 hours because we kept having to take breaks and it was a difficult body to work on, due to how fragile it was. It beat out everything else I saw. From the crazy accident fatalities, the interesting suicides, to even the person who had half their face eaten by rats and half their body covered in a sea of maggots and insects. Edit. Thanks for the gold.
I don't clean them for a living but had to clean a few apartments when my uncle managed an apartment complex. We had one tenant OD on heroin. He sat there for roughly 3 weeks before anyone noticed the smell. They took his body and left it to us to clean up. The dude vomited on the ceiling. There were little dry droplets of vomit all over the ceiling right above where he died, and to top it off he basically liquefied and left a puddle of gut juices on the concrete foundation underneath the carpet. I thought that shit was left to a professional team, but I guess it's optional, and if you don't want to pay for it, you can scoop the brains and blood up yourself.
USART mop propane, nat gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body, no anything.
Oh, I have a story about someone who launched their entrails over a bathroom that is probably 81 square feet. I clean up biohazard material, dead bodies, for my company on occasion because I'm one of the only 2 that's certified. My co-worker went into a house to clean a body, but the boss failed to mention they had been dead for 2 weeks. Okay, whatever, I can deal with that. We walked to the house and not only could you smell it from the start of the driveway, but all the windows were black. Okay, this dude had blackout curtains, I understand that. We suited up and went into the house, which was relatively clean given the circumstances. We knew he died in the bathroom, so we made our way upstairs and followed the flies. So, you know how flies swarm decaying things? Yeah, it wasn't blackout curtains in the bathroom, monsieur. The windows were caked in so many flies that sunlight couldn't come in. My boss also failed to mention he died in the bathtub. You hear about bloating and blah blah blah, but do you know what happens when a body sits in a bathtub for 2 weeks and soaks up all that water? It explodes. The entrails and remains of this soup was all over the taking, the walls, the door. It was everywhere. There was no water in the bathtub, just this sickly pink-colored stew. That was the most disgusting cleanup I've done by far. I can't even imagine what it sounded like when that happened.
My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood. Then finished the job.
Okay, not a crime scene cleaner, but I'm a medic. Have a few bizarre ones. Came into a home to find a man who had attempted to commit suicide by putting a pistol under his jaw but failed. Had a second thought. He ended up having to crawl 5 feet away to where he had thrown the pistol after only blowing the left side of his face off to finish the job. The second one did the trick. Just about every surface in his living room had some remnant of the poor guy. He left behind 2 kids. Another time we had a husband who had caught his wife cheating and had turned on the garbage disposal and forced her arm down it. Massive hemorrhaging. But unfortunately she was DOA. Husband ended up with a self-inflicted shotgun wound. PSA, people really don't understand just how messy a shotgun can make things. Think the Hulk smashing a blood and brain-filled piñata. And this one was more weird than anything, but here goes. Older gentleman we were called to after police performed a wellness check, late 70s. Nice house, nice foreign car in the driveway. Pictures of prayers and crosses all over the house. We head into the bedroom and there he is naked except for what I assume was one of those sexy nun Halloween costumes. Honestly I don't know, but he ended up having a heart attack mid-pleasure time while choking himself with a rosary. Definitely one of the weirdest things I ever saw during my time working the box.
Just trying to do my part to get actual crime cleaners here, but I'm a medic, so similar I guess. One time we found this guy dead in his home in the corner of the living room, tucked around the couch. Ass up, no cloths on. Literal coffee ground looking shit spread everywhere across the house. On the floors, furniture, walls, everywhere. Along with mass amounts of liquor bottles and glass everywhere. He had massive GI issues along with drinking himself to death. Don't know what was worse, the smell or the scene.
Was dispatched to a vehicle vs pedestrian call a couple months ago. And when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson.
Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat. or that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing, though, was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself, and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything, so I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back, a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up. But it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago, and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job.
I used to work in forensics, picking up decedents as well as assisting the medical examiner in conduction of the autopsy. Not necessarily cleaning up the scene, but I've seen a guy who, during some kind of psychotic break, completely castrated his entire package. He then proceeded to stuff the entire package into his mouth and down his throat. He then slit his own throat. Did all of this with a cheap kitchen knife in his shower. Cause: exsanguination complicating transverse carotid and jugular severance. Manner: suicide. Edit. Just want to address anyone who is asking about it potentially being a homicide and give a little bit more background info. I was reluctant at first to give up too much detail, but here is what I'll offer. There was a call to a Section 8 development about a man down the hall acting extremely erratically. He had no known history of drug abuse and no diagnosed psychiatric illnesses. His mother, whom he lived with, as well as many of the neighbors, called 911 multiple times, and first responders were allegedly taking their sweet time getting to the scene. He lured his mother out into the hallway, and then ran back into the apartment alone and locked the door behind him. He then ran to the kitchen, grabbed the knife, went and turned the shower on, and did the deed. He was picked up by EMS and brought to a local hospital where he was pronounced DOA due to his injuries. No preliminary toxicology was conducted by the hospital. His remains were then picked up by us for examination. Unfortunately for the conclusion of the story, this happened on one of my last days of work after I already put in my 2 weeks' notice. Thus, I don't have access to the post-mortem toxicology report to find out why he did it. If the tox is negative for illicit substances, we may, and will likely never know why he actually did it. My personal hypothesis was that he suffered from some form of developmental disorder, and combined with a latent psychiatric illness of some sort, compounded with an unresolved body-gender dysmorphia complex, was unable to cope with his feelings and broke.
Thanks for watching. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel.